Well, good afternoon. My name is Megan Sanders, and you are joining us for our Partners Resource Network and TEA collaborative webinar over progress monitoring. And we have multiple people joining us today, but from Partners Resource Network, you have Christina Henning, who is the Director of Statewide Services. And Partners Resource Network is the nonprofit agency that operates the statewide network of parent training and information centers. We have the PATH Project, the PIN Project, and the TEAM Project. We are federally funded from a grant from Department of Education, Office of Special Education Programs, known as OSEP. We provide training and education, information, referrals, technical assistance, and emotional support for parents of children with disabilities from birth to 26 years of age. So that's who we are. And then joining us on the TEA side, we have Miss Cherry Lee, and I'm going to introduce her, and then I will pass it over to you. So Cherry Lee has served in both general and special education. She's currently employed with the Texas Education Agency and the Division of Special Education as a program specialist for dyslexia. She provides technical assistance in the areas of learning disabilities, evaluation, response to intervention, and compliance with the Section 504 and IDEA regulations. She is a certified academic language therapist, a licensed dyslexia therapist, and an educational diagnostician. Currently, she is pursuing her doctorate in educational leadership. So welcome, Cherry, and I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you, Megan. I appreciate it. And thank you all for joining in. I honor your desire and your willingness to participate in this presentation. And just on a personal note, I am also a parent to a child with a learning difference. My youngest daughter, who is almost 17 years old and a junior in high school here in Austin, Texas, is a learner with dyslexia and dysgraphia. So from a professional and a personal standpoint, I'm here to help answer any questions and provide information specifically today on progress monitoring. So we're going to go ahead and get started, and I'm going to scroll through these slides. And thank you for your patience with me as I navigate this new system. So just an overview of today. We are going to be talking a little bit about special education in general, and then I'm going to be clarifying some terms that often get used interchangeably, which are screening, IEP goals, progress monitoring, and progress reporting. So we're going to delve into clarification of those terms and what they mean for you as a parent supporting a child with a learning difference or a behavior difference or a functional difference. So here is a very broad overview of education processes. And you'll see there in the center of that circle is general curriculum. And we want all students in the state of Texas to have access to the general curriculum. All students, whether they're receiving special education services or not, should be screened. They should be receiving core instruction. They should be progress monitored. They should be receiving tiered instructional supports and accommodations as needed. And then they also should receive summative assessment. And I'm going to break that down for you just a little bit. We have screening that is mandated by Texas Education Code. Students should be receiving evidence-based core instruction, which should also include direct instruction components. We progress monitor all students to ensure that they're mastering skills. We provide tiered instructional supports when students are struggling or as indicated by progress monitoring data. And that tiered instructional supports could look like more intensive instruction. It could be taking place in a small group. And the focus is really on remediating skill deficits and accelerating student achievement. All right, this may look like a tier 2 or a tier 3 small group pullout where the frequency and duration of services is increased to ensure mastery of those skills. And then when we're looking or we're talking about summative assessment, we're talking about evaluating student learning at the end of an instructional unit. That could be like a midterm exam, a final exam, a state exam like the STAR test. You may hear your districts using terms like benchmarks. And they're typically, these summative assessments are typically given at the end of instructional units or courses. And those rectangles and squares there that are in orange refer to services and supports that students receiving special education are entitled through under IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So let's start at the evaluation piece. Students are evaluated and determined by the ARD committee to be in need of special education and related services. An individualized educational program or plan is developed. And in that plan, teams are developing PLAF statements. You may have heard of that acronym PLAF. And that's just referring to the present levels of achievement and academic and functional performance. From the PLAF statement, the ARD committee or the IEP team is charged with developing goals and objectives. And that can include specially designed instruction, related services, modifications, accommodations. In that IEP, you will see those goals and objectives stated explicitly along with any modifications and accommodation that students need to access that general curriculum there. You see that yellow circle again that I'm referring to. Students will be progress monitored, and that progress monitoring will be shared to families of children receiving special education in the form of a progress report. And we'll talk specifically about that a little later in this presentation. Students are periodically reevaluated every 3 years or and parents are also provided their procedural safeguards. So that completes the cycle of special education, but it is an ongoing cycle. All right, let's clarify some terms here. And there's also, there can be confusion of these terms in education among practitioners in education and parents. You'll hear the term evaluation, progress monitoring, screening, progress reporting, and even report cards interchangeably used, which can lead to confusion for parents and teachers. So we're going to break some of these terms down. Let's talk a little bit about screening is defined as a universal measure. It's administered to all students by qualified personnel to determine which students are at risk for learning disabilities or difficulties. All right, screening does not diagnose, but rather identifies predictive variables. We're going to think about red flags. Screening is not a formal evaluation. It does not require parent consent. And students should not be rescreened for conditions or disabilities that they've already been identified with and are receiving special education or Section 504 services for, okay? Screening should be cost effective, it should be brief, it should be valid and reliable, and only trained personnel should be completing the screening and then interpreting the results of the screening. I'm going to give you some examples of some common screening that you may be familiar with. Students may be screened for vision or hearing challenges. They may be screened for scoliosis at school. In the state of Texas, students are also now screened for dyslexia. We're going to talk about that on the next slide, and also other reading difficulties. Screening does not require consent. So if you have a child that is receiving special education services, they may be screened without your permission or consent. General education and special education students should be screened because they may have additional challenges that have not been identified. So if you have a student receiving special education for, let's think about something like speech or language difficulties, they would also receive the reading screening. And in that reading screening, it may be determined that the student also has reading difficulties. And at that time, the ARD committee could convene and determine whether further evaluation in reading is warranted based on those screening results. This is an example of mandated screening in Texas, and it's fairly new. It's Texas Education Code 38.003, and that specifically refers to dyslexia screening, which requires that all students in kindergarten and grade 1 be screened for dyslexia and related disorders, and then all students beyond those grade levels are screened or tested as appropriate. Again, we're referring to screening, not a full evaluation, all right? And students receiving special ed or 504 services should be screened unless the ARD or Section 504 committee determines the screener is not appropriate for that student, and that should be listed in that ARD or IEP document, or the student has already been identified by the ARD or 504 committee with dyslexia. And for a little further information on that specific screening, the kindergarten screening will take place sometime before the end of the school year. The grade 1 screening will take place by or before January 31st of the student's first grade year. Let's delve into the PLAF statement that I was referring to earlier. The PLAF statement refers to present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. And it's a statement in a student's IEP that provides information on how the disability affects involvement and progress in the general curriculum as described in the TEKS, which we know is the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills, the Texas Pre-K Guidelines, or the Texas Infant, Toddler, and 3-year-old Early Learning Guidelines. And just as a side note, Texas has adopted updated TEKS, which will be implemented in the 2019-2020 school year, and those will start like in the August of 2019, so that's quickly approaching. And information on those new TEKS is actually on the TEA website. If you go under the Curriculum Division webpage, you can access the new TEKS. Big emphasis on thinking, listening, speaking, reading, and writing in those language arts TEKS. So I highly suggest that you access those so you can see what grade level expectations are for your child. Those TEKS should be used in the development of PLAF statements as well. So what should a robust PLAF include? It should include all areas of development, both academic and functional, where your child may need support. And when we're thinking about academic achievement, we're thinking about reading and spelling and writing and math problem solving. When we're thinking about functional performance, we're thinking about daily living or self-help skills, skills including dressing, eating, toileting, social skills like turn taking, participation, play, and lunchroom etiquette. Behavior would include attention, focus, inhibition, self-control, executive function skills. Sensory skills could refer to hearing and seeing, communication, talking, listening, and participating appropriately in conversation. And mobility would refer to getting around in school and the community. For younger students, or for all students, you may see goals that relate to both academic and functional performance. Skills like communication with peers, communication with staff. All right, so talking specifically about goals, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act requires that all students who receive special education services have measurable annual goals included in their IEP. And this may include academic, those standards-based goals that we referred to earlier, or functional goals, non-standard-based goals, which are based on student need. And they're documented in that PLAF statement. So the PLAF statements are really important in helping the IEP team determine what specific student needs and deficits are so that goals can be crafted around those to support student access. Student progress toward mastery of the annual goal is reported to the parents, and that should be stated very clearly and explicitly in that plan. Some examples of the frequency for reporting this progress to parents would be monthly or quarterly, or what I've seen at the end of each grading period. So if a student is receiving a report card 4 times a year, typically that progress report is going to be provided to parents at that time along with the student's report card. So the report card and the progress report are 2 separate things. They're 2 separate items that students should be receiving and parents should be receiving as well. So for students receiving special education, progress monitoring data is shared through the progress report, but it really allows teachers and parents and instructional committees to do 4 very important things. It informs decision-making teams. It helps teams estimate the rates of student improvement over time. We want to see students making consistent progress. It helps identify students who are not demonstrating adequate progress, and it helps teams determine when instructional changes are needed. The question that teams need to be asking are students closing the gap? Are the IEP supports and services appropriate for this student and doing what they're intended to do? And if not, that our committee needs to come back together and determine what services and supports students need so that they can be closing academic and functional gaps. We'll talk about some specific examples in a moment, but I just want you to think about the reason that progress is reported to parents and to teams is that so teams can ensure students are making progress and closing gaps. All right. What is progress monitoring? And how does progress monitoring differ from screening? How does progress monitoring differ from progress reporting? General education teachers and special education teachers are progress monitoring students. Progress monitoring is a very standardized method of assessing students, and it lets teachers and teams know how well students are responding to instruction or intervention. You're going to see, like I said earlier, general education teachers and special education teachers progress monitoring students to make sure that they are acquiring new skills or closing gaps. We want progress monitoring measurements provided frequently and more frequently if students are struggling or receiving intervention so that teachers can determine what additional supports are needed or if the intervention is doing what it's supposed to be doing, which is helping students close gaps. Progress monitoring measurement is not an evaluation. They should be brief. So during progress monitoring, we're not wanting to pull kids for hours and hours of assessment. That is not the purpose or the intention of progress monitoring. And again, progress monitoring is not a full evaluation. It should be brief and it should be ongoing. It's not something that's occurring only at the beginning of the year or only at the end of the year. It should be ongoing to make sure our students are closing gaps. And districts and campuses may utilize specific tools to measure progress. So your district or your campus may have adopted specific tools. So if you're talking to parents whose students attend other schools or other districts, they may be utilizing different tools to measure progress. Some of these tools may measure the same skills, but it may be a different product or a different program. These are some progress monitoring examples, and these aren't specific products, but rather examples of how you might monitor that progress. One of the big ways that we monitor reading is through oral reading fluency probes. We're looking for the speed at which students are reading, and we're also looking for the accuracy at which they're reading. Accuracy is referring for correctness. So if a student is reading words correctly and effortlessly. We're also looking for something called prosody when students are reading orally. We want students reading with expression, and we want them using correct punctuation. So if they see a period, they know they should stop. If they see a question mark, they know that they should change the intonation of their voice when they're reading. And reading with prosody helps students understand what they're reading. So oral reading fluency is a big indicator of student reading performance and should be measured when students are in elementary school and even after elementary school when students are struggling with reading. Single word reading, that is just referring to having students read a list of words at grade level or below grade level if appropriate, in determining if they're able to accurately read the words without sounding out. Sounding out is appropriate when students are in kindergarten first, maybe second, but by the end of first, second, and third grade, we want students identifying and reading words accurately without sounding out. So we want them to improve their automaticity. Maze refers to reading comprehension. So you may have seen something like a passage where specific words are deleted or left out, and then students have to choose the best word to go in there based on their reading comprehension skills. So Maze really targets reading comprehension. And typically we're not providing Maze progress monitoring students until they're in third grade or above. You're going to see students progress monitored for their math calculation skills, and that could be, addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, decimals, rounding, fractions, sometimes mixed progress monitoring when students are having to complete calculation skills in a mixed format, or sometimes, it's just straight addition, straight subtraction. We also progress monitor spelling skills. You may see speech therapists or classroom teachers or special education teachers monitoring speech and language, including articulation of specific sounds, the length of student sentences, the way that they use words in sentences, which refers to syntax, and their use of grammar. You may also see students assessed or progress monitored using writing fluency. And again, when I'm speaking about writing fluency, I'm talking about their rate, the speed at which they write, but also the accuracy. So we could be progress monitoring them for spelling, handwriting, and written expression. And then you may also see students progress monitored for behavior. Are they able to start a task without prompts? Do they need prompts? How many prompts do they need? How many check-ins does the student need within a specific instructional period? So those are different things that students may be progress monitored on. And this information then helps special education teachers with the progress report that you're going to receive at home. So here is a progress monitoring cycle for students receiving special education. Okay, we're going to start here at the top where it says our committee develops and or revises that individualized education plan based on data, and it's based on objective data. We want objective data to help guide our committees in developing that PLAF, and we talked about that earlier. That's that present level of academic achievement and functional performance. So once teams have the data, they use that data to develop the PLAF statement, and from there, the team develops goals and objectives related to the PLAF that help support students' access to the general curriculum. Then the team develops services and supports to ensure that progress is made related to the goals. That progress monitoring and that data gathering is an iterative process. It's happening throughout this process, and progress reports are then provided to parents as stated in the IEP, and then teams come back together, they review data, they review progress reports, and they determine if students have mastered their goals, and if they haven't, what additional supports and services should the team consider to help that student. When we're talking about services and supports, that's on the bottom there, we're talking about assistive technology, we're talking about parent counseling and parent training, we're talking about audiological services or hearing services, we're talking about counseling for the child, we're talking about occupational therapy, physical therapy, social work services, transportation. Those are all the services and supports that teams should be considering for students to help support them in achieving their goals and objectives to, again, access the curriculum. So you as a parent are a crucial member of that ARD committee. And it's important for you to know what to address when you're reviewing student progress. And what happens when students aren't making expected progress? What do you do? Do you write the same goal year after year into that IEP? All right, is that going to help the student make progress, or do we need to look at things in a more critical way? These are some questions that can guide you and can guide the team in supporting students when they're not making expected progress. So the first one is, how has instruction been adjusted and data been collected? And that's instruction in the general education classroom if students are receiving instruction there, and it's also instruction in small group or resource settings. So how's the instruction been adjusted and data been collected? Is the instruction student-centered? Are we really thinking about the student's needs when we're designing that specially designed instruction? And how is this progress provided to you as a parent, to the ARD committee, to the student? ARD committees need to be able to review this data very easily, and when that data is provided visually, whether it be in graphs, charts, that helps teams determine if students are closing gaps. What interventions have been used or tried, and have these interventions been implemented with fidelity? And what I'm meaning by that is, if teams have adopted or are using specific curriculums or interventions, is that intervention used according to the publisher guidelines? Has that teacher been trained to utilize that specific program or that methodology or that framework? Okay. Does that teacher need additional training to help her support the student's needs? And when we're looking at the data, are there patterns across time in the data? Are we noticing that the student is struggling more in the morning when they're transitioning to school, but not necessarily in the afternoon, or vice versa? We're noticing that the student is making less progress after lunch for whatever reason. So notice patterns of progress during the student's day and also during the year. Okay, if the student is having specific difficulties, at the beginning of school, transitioning from summer back to school, or is the student having specific difficulties after winter break, after spring break, that's important data for the ARD committee to consider. And what rate of progress should we be expecting based on previous data? So how has the student been gaining in new skills in first grade, in second grade, in third grade? And what should that expectation be for that student now in fourth grade? And how is the progress on the goal measured and reported? And that goes to, when we're writing goals, also determining how are we going to measure the progress made related to that goal. And this last bullet I've already talked about is additional training of personnel needed to effectively implement the goal or the support that's stated in that IEP. If you have a student who needs services and supports related to dyslexia, for instance, do personnel on the campus that are working with the student need additional training? What would that look like for that staff member? And how can the campus or the district support that staff member in obtaining that training so that they can support the child with dyslexia? That's just an example. So if a student fails to maintain progress towards an IEP goal for 2 consecutive reporting periods, best practice states that the ARD committee should consider the need to meet and evaluate current supports and services that are not currently resulting in progress. And we're gonna look critically at some progress surrounding a goal on a child's IEP and kind of determine what we should do based on this data that's been collected. So here we go. This is an IEP goal at the top regarding K, who is a student. Let's first of all, K, a third grade student, when orally reading an unfamiliar third grade level text, will read 65 correct words per minute with 95% or greater accuracy as documented by teacher-kept data. So this teacher is likely collecting data on oral reading fluency progress, and she's sharing that with the special education teacher, or maybe the special education teacher is collecting this data and then communicating that data through progress reports. All right, so if you notice the top row says first PR period is referring to the first progress reporting period. So this student is in third grade. She's receiving a report card every 9 weeks, and the IEP progress report is also coming home to parents at that time. So we know we have a goal. We want her reading 65 correct words per minute by the end of the 4th reporting period. All right, so let's look at scenario A. In scenario A, we have that baseline data that she's reading 45 correct words per minute with 80% accuracy, because that's where she was at the end of the first 9 weeks. That's where she was, and parents got that report home. At the end of the 2nd reporting period, she's reading 45 correct words per minute, same speed, but now she's improved her accuracy, meaning she's reading more words correctly per minute. And look at that jump at the end of the 3rd progress report period. Now she's reading 58 correct words per minute, and her accuracy is improved to 90% accuracy. So she's making some good gains. And at the end of the 4th reporting period, she's now reading 67 words per minute with 95% accuracy. Has Kay met her goal? Yes, she has. So now the team, when they're meeting again to review her fluency goal, they may continue to include a fluency goal in her IEP, but it's going to be adapted now to address her reading fluency. And so, her next goal may be that she's reading 90 words a minute at the end of the year using a 4th grade level text, all right? But let's look at scenario B. In scenario B, if you look over her reading data, she's showing very little growth from the 1st reporting period to the 4th reporting period. There's some red flags that are now going up, because even though she's getting small group instruction 4 times a week for 30 minutes, she's making very, very little growth. So that ARD committee, and you as a parent that are part of that ARD committee, needs to determine what's going on and why isn't Kay closing the gap. Okay, has Kay been absent? Has Kay been ill? Is the program that she's receiving not appropriate for her? Does she need additional services and supports to help her close that gap and improve her oral reading fluency? The team needs to consider additional factors that may be going on that are interfering with Kay's ability to close that gap. So that's why it's crucial that parents are involved in this process and that teachers are collecting accurate data that reflect the student's growth. Because if the student isn't closing the gap, then the ARD committee needs to come together and determine what supports that we need to be providing Kay so that she can be closing this reading gap. All right, so like we said before, let me just reiterate, anytime a student who receives special education service is not making progress in Gen Ed or not making progress on her IEP goals, an ARD must be held to address the lack of progress. You don't have to wait for an annual ARD meeting to review this progress. You can call a meeting earlier than that if you are concerned a student is not closing the gap and making progress related to their goals. Similarly, if a student does not pass a state assessment, I'm referring to the STAR test, at any grade level or in any subject, the ARD committee must develop an accelerated instruction plan, the acronym is AIP, as well as an intensive program of instruction, known as an IPI, to address the student's failure on state assessment. All right, and this is true whether the student will retest And there's some specific guidance for students receiving STAR or taking the STAR alternate 2. And again, the ARD committee is developing and implementing this AIP and this IPI. And for students who are at risk of not graduating, the ARD committee must also develop an AIP or IPI as well. Progress monitoring, progress reports, and screening data can and should be used to help ARD committees and school planning teams determine instructional supports, accommodations, and the need for additional evaluation or reevaluation. Progress monitoring, progress reports, and screening data are not full individual evaluations or reevaluations, but this data can be very helpful and useful in creating and completing that comprehensive evaluation. So when your child was going through the evaluation process or the reevaluation process, the monitoring and the reports and the screening data can and should be used in that process. It's very helpful to the diagnostician or school psychologist when writing that evaluation to utilize that data. And that local education agency or the school district must conduct a full individual and initial evaluation before the provision of special education and related services. All right, parents should receive prior written notice, the notice of procedural safeguards, and parent consent as well is required before that evaluation takes place. Parent consent is not required for progress monitoring data to occur or for screening to occur, but it is required for that FIE. All right, so I hope I've clarified some terms like screening, progress monitoring, progress reports, and evaluation in this presentation. And I know that Christina and Megan have gathered some additional questions that you all have sent in, and I'm gonna talk about those now.
Hey, Cherry.
Hi.
All right, there's Megan. Megan, do you need me to unmute you? Okay. I'm trying. I think I got it now.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. I was like, wait a minute, I can't talk.
All right.
Okay. So guys, I failed to mention this at the beginning, and I've put it in the chat box a couple of times now. When we do these collaborative webinars, we do a calling for questions before the presentation itself. So these are questions that were pre-submitted. If you have additional questions about the presentation, Cherry, is it okay if they like shoot you an email or something like that?
Absolutely, and my email is there on the slide now. It's cherry.lee@tea.texas.gov. And my focus here at the agency, I'm in the technical assistance division here, and I really support dyslexia. But if you have questions, regarding anything in this presentation or dyslexia, feel free to email me.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I just wanted to clear that up for anybody who has some questions coming in. So, all right. Well, let's get started on our submitted questions. Number 1, scheduling of intensive and accelerated multisensory reading and social skills instruction and related services can be difficult, especially when we're talking about a secondary level. What actions or supports can or is TEA doing in regards to this?
I'm going to talk about a few right now. TEA grants or contracts out services and supports and networks. And right now, we are working with the Building RTI Collaborative. That is through the University of Texas, and it's funded by TEA. And Building RTI has created hundreds of free professional development instructional tools specific for middle school and secondary teachers, including booklets, lesson plans, podcasts, modules, documents, presentations in the areas of reading, mathematics, behavior, progress monitoring, assessment, and intervention. Oftentimes, when we think about multisensory reading instruction or behavior supports, we're thinking at the elementary levels. And we know students need ongoing sorry about that, ongoing support in the area of reading and social skills instruction in middle school and high school as well. So I would say to most definitely check out the buildingrti.utexas.org website. And I know that you guys are going to get a copy of these questions so that you'll be able to, parents, you'll be able to access these resources. There's resources specific to parents. There's resources specific to educators. Additionally, Region 20 has created a website called Progress in the General Curriculum. It is also a statewide network, and there is some fabulous resources related to secondary instruction on that website and information specific to parents. Future resources include a network that is under an ongoing development right now called Intervention Best Practices that will address intervention and supports for students in EC through 12 related to reading, math, and behavior. And that network will launch July 1st with materials and outputs provided by July 1st, 2020. It'll kind of be an ongoing process. Yeah.
All right, excellent. Are efforts being considered to help districts find ways and funds to provide summer and after-school services for students with average intelligence who are behind grade level and those who need multisensory reading instruction?
Excellent. And now the word multisensory has been used twice. So I just want to define what multisensory is in case you as a parent are wondering. Because when you think of multisensory, you're thinking, okay, that's all the 5 senses. So I'm thinking, vision, I'm thinking hearing, I'm thinking touching, tasting. No, we're not tasting. When we're thinking about multisensory related to education, we're thinking about the visual output, we're thinking about the auditory output, the kinesthetic or movement output, and the tactile output. And when we're thinking about kinesthetic, we're even thinking about the way in which the mouth moves to produce the sound. So we're thinking about more than just jumping up and down when we're talking about kinesthetic. And then tactile, thinking about how we're forming letters or how we're accessing or utilizing the keyboard for output purposes. And multisensory instruction is not only for students in pre-K and kinder and first. We know that all learners benefit from the receipt of instruction in multisensory ways, so that we're engaging our visual processes, our auditory processes, that we're able to share and communicate through multiple modes, including the use of technology. So districts may use up to 15% of their special education funds through IDEA every year to develop and implement coordinated early intervening services for students in K through 12. So districts can use up to 15% of their IDEA funds to develop services and supports for students who need intensive intervention in the areas of math, reading, or behavior. For students that are not receiving, and those are funds utilized to support students who are struggling but are not receiving our special education services yet. And those funds can be used for professional development for teachers and other school staff to deliver scientifically based academic and behavioral supports. And that can also be used for direct service to students. Special education students may be entitled to extended school year services, but that is determined by a student's ARD committee, and that's noted in the student's IEP supplement for extended school year services. And that ESY supplement must identify which goals and objectives would specifically be addressed, and those are provided at absolutely no cost to the parent, okay? And I think that's about it for that question.
All right, perfect. So what is being done to increase the use of technology and auditory materials by students with disabilities?
All right, so again, parents, you're going to want to access this link through the document that's going to be uploaded for you. But the Texas Education Agency supports the Assistive Technology Network. It's known as TATN. It's at Region 4. That's down in Houston. to ensure that students with disabilities receive assistive technology devices and services so that they can benefit from FAPE, that free, appropriate public education. And the TATN actually has representatives at every region center in Texas. So all 20 region centers do have a contact to this assistive technology network. And they developed a framework for statewide collaboration. So personnel at the school where your children are attending can reach out to these region persons for additional information on how to support students using assistive technology.
All right. What can parents do if ARD or IEP teams or educators are unwilling to agree to specific accommodations, modifications, or technology?
Well, we know that the ARD committee determines the services and supports that a student receiving special education is entitled to. But parents and guardians can address their concerns with their child's teacher or campus administrative personnel. They can request an ARD meeting regarding the provision of services. If parents disagree with decisions made by the ARD committee, there are specific procedural protections that are available, as well as alternative methods of dispute resolution. And the TEA webpage has documents that parents can use to help to determine what their next steps are regarding disputes or disagreements with the committee.
All right, perfect. And then ESC 20 and TEA have developed some very good documents regarding access to the general education curriculum. What activities will be continued or begin to educate educators and parents about these?
So I talked earlier about the Future Network 5, which is Intervention Best Practices. Network 3, which is outlined in the Special Education Strategic Plan, is entitled Inclusive Services and Practices for Improved Student Outcomes. And that network will specifically address supporting students in the general curriculum and includes some training for teachers, for administrators, as well as some information on how parents can support their child while at school.
All right, excellent. Well, those are the questions that were pre-submitted for today. But again, Sherry has been generous in sharing her email address with us. So any additional questions anybody has, she is willing for you guys to send those to her, and she'll get you some kind of answer back on those. So thank you so much for all the information, Sherry. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, parents, for supporting your child. Like I said, I'm a professional who specializes in special education, but I'm also a parent of a learner with a disability, and I appreciate you learning and growing your knowledge that are there to support your child.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And just a quick reminder to everybody, the recording of today's webinar, as well as the PowerPoints and the Q&A document that we just went over, will be available on our website tomorrow afternoon. And I've stuck the link in the chat box if you need it. Sherry, if you want to quit the share on your end.
Okay, so I'm going to click. No, I don't want a new share. I want to. There we go.
Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate it.
Perfect. All right, so let's talk about what's coming up soon. There we go. All right, so April 30th is another TEA collaborative webinar. We're talking about extended school year. That one will be, again, at 12:15 Central Standard Time, and then followed immediately in Spanish at 1:15. Save the date for April 30th. We do need your questions pre-submitted before this presentation. So if you have questions about extended school year or something else that you would like to ask TEA, this is the link to go ahead and submit your questions. We're taking those all the way up until Friday, which is March 29th. So get those in for us.
Yeah, and that's my mistake there. It says progress monitoring, but it should say extended school year or ESY. I'm sorry about that, guys.
For extended school year. All right, so what's coming up for PRN? We have What's Next? Legal Options for Parents When an ARD Meeting Wasn't Enough. And this is the follow-up to last month's webinar. We're now talking about some different dispute resolution options. That's going to be done by Ms. Colleen Elby with Disability Rights Texas. That one is Tuesday, April 16th, again at 12:15 Central Standard Time. And then we have April 22nd. We're bringing in some really cool guest speakers. We have a mother and daughter's journey with autism. So this is in honor of course, Autism Awareness Month. It's going to be Dr. Jeanette Reyes and her daughter, Michelle Coronado. So make plans to join us April 22nd at 12:15. All right, this is our information. So if you have questions, comments, anything regarding this webinar or anything upcoming, feel free to reach out to me. You have my email address on the screen. You also have Christina's information, and then you can access a list of our upcoming statewide webinars as well as the recordings from previous webinars on our website. So that's there. And then make sure you like us on Facebook. Give us that like. You can see all kinds of different things we have going on there, including a couple of different Facebook Live series that are happening. So thank you guys for joining us today.